For today's video, I'm going to be talking about 10 NHL players who could be huge X factors next season. Now, an X factor isn't always the best player on the team. Maybe it's just a player who, whenever they play well, the entire team plays well, or whenever they play bad, the entire team just doesn't have a good game or something like that. And these are just 10 players that I think could really play an important piece for their team next season. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right into the video with the first player. Starting the video off with the obvious one, and that is Patrik Laine of the Winnipeg Jets, a 21-year-old right winger who had 44 goals in the 2017-18 season, and a lot of people, including myself, thought that coming into this year he would really take that up a notch and become one of the best goal scorers in the NHL at such a young age. I had predicted he was going to win the Rocket Richard Trophy, but this year was kind of a disappointment for Patrik Laine. 30 goals and 20 assists for 50 points, and while yes, those are still some solid offensive numbers, you have to take into account that the majority of those goals were literally in 1 month, and for the rest of the season he was just very shaky and very inconsistent. And for Patrik Laine, he's definitely not the best two-way forward out there whatsoever, so when he's struggling with his offensive game, it's honestly kind of tough to keep him on the ice. And now you look at what Winnipeg lost this offseason, they're definitely, not as deep of a team as they were the past 2 years, and I think if they want to continue to be one of the better teams in the Western Conference and still be a contender, Patrik Laine has to bounce back and has to be like a 40 goal scorer, because when he's on, he's one of the most lethal players in the league, and you have to give a lot of defensive focus to him, and that just opens the game up so much more for guys like Kyle Connor, Nick Ehlers, Scheifele, and Blake Wheeler. Patrik Laine must bounce back because he is a huge X factor for this Winnipeg team, and if he's on and has an amazing year, I see no reason why Winnipeg can't be a top team in the West again. Moving along to the next player, and that is Clayton Keller for the Arizona Coyotes, another young player who kind of struggled this past season. Only 47 points for Clayton Keller, and this is following up a very strong rookie season, but this does happen a lot. It's called a sophomore slump. A rookie will come in, have a very strong season, and then the following year he won't do as well, but I'm pretty confident that Clayton Keller can bounce back and have a strong offensive season, and I honestly think he is going to need to, because this Arizona team, they really struggled to score this past season, and they did address that in a big way, acquiring Phil Kessel, who I definitely think is going to help the overall team, but I also think that is going to benefit Clayton Keller as well, and if those guys can get some chemistry going, they should be a very fun duo to watch. They have a solid goaltending tandem, they have a blue line that can definitely hold its own. I just think it is a matter of getting that scoring punch from guys like Nick Schmaltz, Derek Stepan, maybe if he can chip in with 15 or 20 goals, Christian Dvorak, but the big X factor for me is Clayton Keller, and I think he has to definitely get that 47 points up a notch if Arizona wants to be competing for a playoff spot again next year. Moving along to the next player, it is Casey Mittelstadt for the Buffalo Sabres. Now last year Buffalo had an amazing top line. Jeff Skinner, Jack Eichel, and Sam Reinhart really developed some very good chemistry, and they all had very good offensive seasons, but for the rest of the forward group, they really struggled to put the puck in the net, and I think Casey Mittelstadt can be a big help in changing that if he can get that 25 points from last season up to around 50 or maybe even 60 and be like a very solid second line center, because that definitely would take a lot of pressure off that top line, and I think the lack of scoring depth this past season was a big reason why they fell off in a big way after the hot start they got off to. They signed Marcus Johansson as a free agent, who is another guy that can definitely help in that aspect of the game. Another X factor you could say about this Buffalo team is goaltending, but I honestly just don't even know if I want to call Carter Hutton or Linus Ullmark an X factor. I'm more so relying on the offense, because looking at the roster of this team, they should be good enough to compete for a playoff spot, but that is a very tough Atlantic division, and I'm honestly not quite sure who they would bump out if they do jump into the playoffs, but that is the beauty of the NHL. Anything can happen, and I think Casey Mittelstadt can be a really big X factor for this team next year. The next player we're going to talk about is Tom Wilson for the Washington Capitals. Now obviously Tom Wilson is a controversial player, and a lot of people dislike him, and it obviously makes sense. He crosses the line way too much, he throws edgy hits and really risky hits, he plays to injure some people it seems like sometimes, and it just makes sense as to why a lot of people would dislike him, but love him or hate him, he's a huge part of this Washington team. I just think he needs to focus on staying on the ice and playing the game as opposed to, trying to take people's heads off, because because when he is on the ice, he's usually on a line with Nick Backstrom and Alex Ovechkin, and when that line is clicking, it is one of the most dangerous lines in the entire NHL. And after Tom Wilson's amazing playoff run when Washington won the Stanley Cup in the 2017-18 season, he was rewarded that summer with a pretty hefty contract that a lot of people were really skeptical about, and rightfully so. You know, a lot of people didn't think he was worth that, but he came back this year and scored 22 goals in just 63 games, had 40 points, and showed that there is offense there. I just think he needs to stay on the ice and not be suspended, because if he can play a full 82 game season on that Backstrom and Ovechkin line, I see no reason as to why Tom Wilson can't be a 30 goal scorer and be a player that can consistently give you 50 plus points. I think he's a huge X factor for this team. It's just a matter of him focusing on the game and actually staying on the ice. Moving along to the next player, and that is Corey Perry of the Dallas Stars. Now Dallas, they lacked a little bit of scoring depth this past season. They had a very solid top line, but behind that it wasn't really, you know, the greatest. They had a great decor, they had great goaltending, and that is the biggest reason why this team was able to, you know, get in and make the playoffs and have a relatively solid playoff run as well. And they brought in Joe Pavelski, who's obviously a huge piece, and I would understand if a lot of you guys think he should be the X factor for this team, but I went with Corey Perry because he is a guy they brought in for very cheap, hasn't been very good whatsoever over the past couple years, but I still think there is something there, and I think with a fresh start now, maybe some new line mates, and just getting his confidence back, he still can be a 20 goal scorer if he is healthy, and that would be huge for this team to get that kind of scoring depth along with Joe Pavelski and now Rope Hintz, who I think can be a very good depth scorer for them, to go along and complement that very solid top line. This team can really be dangerous, and I think if Corey Perry is on and stays healthy and is potentially a 20 goal scorer, it would make that team that much better, and that's why I have him as the X factor for Dallas. Next up, we have Carter Hart for the Philadelphia Flyers. And now when you look at Philadelphia on paper, they should definitely be a playoff team. They're led by Claude Giroux, who is very good. They have Sean Couturier, Jacob Voracek, and now you have young guys like Nolan Patrick, Travis Konechny, and then you have a great decor as well. They should be a playoff team. It's just been the goaltending over the past, you know, year and a half that has been the shaky part of this team. And now hopefully they have the answer in Carter Hart. He got his feet wet with 30 plus NHL games played this past season, put up decent numbers as well, had a positive record, and now I think he's definitely going to improve and get better next year. And if he does, and if he can even be a slightly above average starting goaltender in the NHL, I definitely think Philadelphia should be a top 4 team in the Metro Division. But if he struggles, then I definitely think it could be another rough season for the Philadelphia Flyers, and that is why I think he is a huge X factor for them. Moving along, we have another pretty obvious one, and that is William Nylander for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Had a disappointing year, but a lot of that is due to the fact that he just got thrown right into the fire after not playing in the majority of the first half of the season due to the contract dispute. But now he's going to have a full training camp, he's going to have a full season with this team. I think he really got a lot of his confidence back at the World Championships, where he played fantastic for Team Sweden. And if William Nylander can get back to being like a 60-point guy, and I honestly think he can do better than that and put up like 70 plus points, especially if he and Austin Matthews stay healthy and play on a line together for the full season. And if he does, that just makes this team that much more dangerous, because we didn't really get to see the full potential of this Toronto team this past year because William Nylander wasn't himself, and he wasn't even there for the first, you know, quarter of the season. And I think if William Nylander comes back and really scores at a high rate and is a good playmaker for Austin Matthews, it'll just make this team that much more dangerous, and I think he's a huge X factor for them. Next up, we have James Neal for the Edmonton Oilers. They traded Milan Lucic for James Neal, a 1-for-1 swap, basically a swap of bad contracts, but I think James Neal is an upgrade from Milan Lucic, especially for this team, because they need wingers in a bad way. And James Neal, yes, he had an awful season for the Calgary Flames, but he's only 31, and I think he is capable of bouncing back, especially if he plays with McDavid or Draisaitl. I don't see a situation where if James Neal is healthy, he doesn't score 20 goals. I think he's going to be great for them on the power play and just give another outlet for Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. Like I said, this team needs wingers, and if James Neal can provide some scoring punch, and then you also have guys like Alex Chiasson, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and maybe some of the younger players like Yamamoto and Benson come in and play well, this team can be competitive and maybe can push for a playoff spot. I wouldn't bet on it, but James Neal, in my opinion, really has the potential to be a big X factor for Edmonton heading into next season. Moving on to the next player, we have Lehner for the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, Chicago is a very good offensive team. They put up good offensive numbers this past season. They just couldn't really keep the puck out of their net. They didn't have the greatest goaltending situation and obviously didn't have a good blue line either. But if their offense can produce at the rate that they did this past season and maybe even better, and Lehner can replicate his season that he had with the New York Islanders, which is definitely a lot to ask, but if he can still be a solid goaltender, then Chicago really should be a playoff team, and they're definitely going to be a very exciting team to watch, as long as they have guys like Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, and the young and up and coming guys like Strome and DeBrincat. And then if you get a good Lehner and the blue line can hold its own, this is going to be a good team, and in my opinion, that makes Lehner the biggest X factor for this Blackhawks team. Now, finishing out the video with Alex Galchenyuk as the biggest X factor for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Pittsburgh's GM wanted to shake up the roster, and that is exactly what they did. They traded away Phil Kessel and they brought in Alex Galchenyuk, and in my opinion, if Galchenyuk struggles, then this team could struggle to get some scoring depth behind obviously Crosby, Gensel, and Evgeny Malkin. I was honestly gonna make Malkin the X factor just because I think his health will play a huge part in Pittsburgh's success next year. I decided to go with Galchenyuk just because he's basically coming in as a replacement for Phil Kessel, and I think he is going to need to get back to that 30-goal scorer that he was in that 1 year with the Montreal Canadiens. And if he plays a full year on a line with Sidney Crosby, I see no reason why he couldn't score 30 goals. I mean, you see what Crosby does to players. He's turned Jake Gensel into an elite goal scorer, 40 goals this past season. I'm pretty excited to see how Galchenyuk plays now with a fresh start for the Pittsburgh Penguins, but if he struggles, I think Pittsburgh could struggle, but if he doesn't at all, then I think Pittsburgh could still be one of the better teams in the entire NHL, and for that reason, I think he is a massive X factor for them. So that is going to wrap up today's video. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Make sure to let me know down in the comment section, who do you think is the biggest X factor for your favorite team heading into next season? And with that being said, I hope you guys all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please make sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel for daily NHL content, and I will see you guys all in the next video.